For the actions of the city have the power of impacting the quality of people's lives years away. In leading a city, you have this wonderful continued inspiration driven by your knowledge of the goodness of the citizens. I really thought that my duty in life then was to run for mayor, unite the community, pass it on to somebody, and go back to practice law.
There's a certain segment of the black community that is outraged because they think that Joe Riley does too much that's beneficial for the white community. There's an equal segment of the white community that's outraged because they think Joe Riley caters to the black community. And so I think that when you tick people off in an equal opportunity way, it probably means somewhere in there you're doing something good.
Charleston, I don't need to tell you, is a very traditional place, and so any kind of concept of change has typically been met with resistance.
Very rarely do you have a person as a leader who is both a visionary and has the ability to make those visions a reality.
I don't know if it's in his vocabulary that it can't be done. If he captures a vision, he feels it can be done. And he just finds ways of trying to make it happen.
Joe Riley has made a magnificent mayor because he works at it. He works and works and works at it.
He's well liked and appreciated.
The most respectful thing for Joe, for me especially as a man, is that he's going to do what the hell he feels is right. And he is one of the few politicians alive today that does that.
But this is the most wonderful city to live in. It's a wonderful, beautiful town, and Joe Riley is the #1 reason for that.
Well, let me begin by asking this. What's happening in the South? The South has voted now for a Republican president time after time, and yet they'll vote for Democrats forever as mayor of Charleston, maybe only because of he has so distinguished a record. But is there
Mayor of Charleston could be mayor anywhere.
He created what could be called Politics 101 for Charleston. He wrote the book on how to be a political survivor, how to make a difference in the community.
Look here, honey, there's a big family Bible on a chair knob. Let's go get it. Great big family Bible. The main impetus, my running for mayor, was racial progress. I felt that this city couldn't be a great city and couldn't be a just city and couldn't be a successful city until its doors were open to all people.
Charleston has levels of interesting apartheid. There's geographical apartheid, there's religious apartheid, there's apartheid that depends upon how long you have lived here and whether you were born here. And all of that goes back into the antiquity of the city, and it influences the way that the black community interacts.
You know, what happened was, what the tragedy happened in the South was that we went from Africans being enslaved to the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War, freeing them, but that didn't really happen until the war was over in '65. And then that period of Reconstruction, which revisionism, you know, and the South treated as this terribly oppressive time. And then that door slammed shut in 1876. And so then there was this period of Jim Crow, that African Americans were no longer enslaved, but they weren't free. it was that undercurrent of just not being able to let go of that suppression, that I'm better than you because I'm a different color. And at least that makes me feel better because I can't own you anymore, but I am better than you.
Charleston in the late 60s and early 70s was a sleepy community, had not yet been discovered by the outside world.
It was certainly a smaller city and considerably less busy than it is today, and we were a Navy town.
Charleston in the late 60s and early 70s was first a part of the South in terms of racial change, awareness, challenge, controversy, and needed progress. It was where the South was.
We have a very complicated problem in Charleston. We do not know what to expect from moment to moment and hour to hour and day to day. The situation there has really become more serious as each hour and each day has passed, because it has begun to shift from a local dispute over working conditions into one of a more serious nature, dealing with union recognition, things of that nature, as well as the involvement of civil rights groups, and thus into a civil rights matter.
We, as black people in South Carolina, have awakened to the fact that we are no longer afraid of the white man.
In the hospital, they have white workers doing the same work as black. You know, they might have a white nurse's aide and a black nurse's aide, yet the white aide earns more money than the black.
I know that hospital workers have been working full-time jobs at part-time pay. After all, $1.30 an hour is not a wage. It is an insult.
That hospital strike had a positive effect on the community.
Mother Emanuel, Morris Brown, Morris Street Baptist were staging grounds for those who went down and protested.
This is about the 5th speech that I have made in Charleston. And every time I have been here, I've been taken to see the historical sites of this city. I don't want to see any more historical sites. I want to tell you tonight, and I want to tell all of Charleston, that we are going to all be saved together as brothers, or we're going to perish as fools.
They talked about the police insults. They talked about some violence, even though people don't like to think there was violence in the civil rights era in South Carolina. There was. They talked about the insulting arrogance of those whose basic attitude was, how dare these people think that they can stand up and do things like that.
Water hoses were used, and we were jailed, but you never saw snarling dogs. You never saw cattle prods. These things that were so anti-human. You just never saw that in South Carolina. And a conscious decision was made that that would not be the case.
It lasted for 100 days. It had the city closed down for 100 days. And it was closed down from April and July. So it was the real height of the tourist season. Nobody made any money.
I happen to believe that the '69 hospital strike probably played a large part in the interest of many other community leaders in recruiting Joe to run for mayor.
But after the hospital strike, that's when blacks began to get elected to public office. That's when Joe Riley got elected to the State House.
I don't want to be rude, but and my parents are Southerners, and I was brought up in South Carolina, but I don't think one thinks of Southern Democrats as having successfully faced the racial problem historically.
Without any question, of the Democratic Party in the South, in the 60s faced a choice, and it had the choice of exclusion or the choice of openness. And I couldn't be prouder as a Democrat of what the party in the South did of opening the doors to the black voters.
This is what happened. So I was elected to the state legislature when I was 25, 1968. I ran with first African-American Herbert Fielding to be elected to the General Assembly since Reconstruction.
One of the main objectives at that time was to get some minority people in the legislature. At that time, there was no blacks in Columbia, so I was really sent to open the doors so that more black people could get into the legislature, and they did.
One of the things I'm most proud of Dad is that he was called LBJ in the legislature. It stood for Little Black Joe, which he was given that name, I think, the late 60s, early 70s when he was in the State House and the General Assembly. And his desk mate happened to be Herbert Fielding.
Newcoming people would sit in the back, and the older folks, older members of the delegation sat up front. Instead of sitting in the back, Joe Riley moved me up front, and I sat right next to him.
And I think he was given that name fairly pejoratively, perhaps, by sort of the white establishment, because it was so unheard of for a white man to be so vociferously supportive of the African-American cause, African-American issues, and that he was.
I'll never forget, Joe and I sat on the left, and Joe sat on the right, and every time I'd raise my hand, the speaker, Saul Blatt was the speaker, and he'd look down and he'd say, "Herbert, what you want now?"
It was a name that some intended in a derogatory sense, a nickname. But I believe it was one that Joe wore proudly. I can remember campaigning myself in African-American neighborhoods, and in many of those homes that I would enter, there would be a picture of Jack Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Joe Riley. And so it was known.
And he was a very progressive member of the General Assembly. He was a member of a group that was referred to by the press and others as the Young Turks. And they were people, even in Columbia in the House of Representatives, who were trying to reform, we might say, the good old boy system in South Carolina.
Some seems extremely modest now. The state did not have a public kindergarten. And so I was a strong advocate for that. And there was a lot of reaction to that.
He was unashamed and unhesitant to sponsor civil rights issues.
I was doing something that, you know, like an athlete who is, you know, playing a sport and realizing that he or she can run as fast as you need to run to do well or hit the ball correctly. Well, I had studied history and I would study the law, and so I was enjoying that in an achievement measure.
At that time when things were so delicate, that here you had this little white Irishman from Charleston standing up for African Americans when it was wildly unpopular to do.
And I think at the state and local level in the South, it has been the Democratic Party that welcomed the participation of the black voters, and without any question, a part of the foundation of the Republican Party in the South. And I know because I ran for election for the first time in 1968, and a part of the foundation of the Republican Party's growth in the South were racial politics and was racism. There's no question about that.
My wife, when I was in my third term, and we had one child and one on the way, and she really didn't want me to run again. It caused me to be away from home 2 nights every week from January until June. And then, you know, the other demands. And so I got out of the legislature and assumed that that was the end of my public service career. And I did it with a good conscience.
Mayor Joe Riley grew up in an environment in which his father was dedicated to public service, frequently associated as close friends with these elected and non-elected public servants. And so it was a part of his life.
I grew up in downtown Charleston as a child, young child, saw my father being a leader.
I was a liberal, he was a liberal. His father was ultra-conservative. It's very strange.
He never ran for public office. He threatened to. My mother said she would leave him if he did.
I always thought of Big Joe Riley kind of like Joe Kennedy and Jack Kennedy. You know, Jack Kennedy was kind of charismatic and idealistic, whereas Joe Kennedy was kind of realistic.
There was a billboard that was at the foot of the Cooper River Bridge when there was just one bridge, and it said, "Welcome to Charleston, America's most historic city." And as a child, having read enough history, you know, I felt that was a substantial overstatement. That's the best thing that the city thought it had to promote, was its antiquity. In that way, perhaps, Charleston was still looking backward, even though there were efforts to move forward. So Charleston was a city in that process of changing.
It was generational. After all, we were children of the 1960s. And while we were at the Citadel, the civil rights movement began and was substantially underway by the time Joe graduated in 1964. Those were major factors influencing us all, and particularly Joe. And so he was always of that different generational attitude, as was I suppose, than our fathers.
I just think there was a feeling on the part of the black community that progress was just too slow. They weren't getting enough people in the state legislature. And now the mayor of Charleston was coming up, and you know, they wanted somebody who was going to make some serious commitments to do something. The Republican Party would tend to challenge black voters, and you needed lawyers, you needed strong poll watchers to make sure people could vote.
And I worked the polls that election day, and I saw their faces. It was quiet, determined, standing in long lines.
Blacks was voting all the time in large numbers. Folk used to leave the fields and go to vote. Folk used to leave the job and go to vote. But they saw that basically almost like a new day with Joe being elected.
He ran without a slate. That's the first time that had ever happened. Every previous mayor had run with a slate of city council candidates, all white, all male. He threw that aside and ran by himself, and as a result, we had African American and female members of city council elected, which had never occurred before, and that was really, to me, a real hallmark of this characteristic of inclusion, which I think is such an integral part of who he is.
He called me one day and asked me would I be willing to go with him to Atlanta, Georgia. And of course I said, for what? And he said, well, look, if I'm going to be mayor, we need to learn how to run a city.
Which they should have, because everybody will tell you there's not a Democratic or Republican way to pave a road or provide police service. I mean, there's no room for ideological arguments here. This is a business. You're getting things done. And
one of the things that the good mayor can do is learn about a lot of things. You have to be a quick study because you have to know everything about everything from, drug enforcement to, arts organizations, and you have to know enough to make smart decisions.
Today, for this most beautiful city and its wonderful people, marks one of the most significant days in our history. The Leto Festival for Charlestonians recalls this city's grandest age.
It was practically as he was elected, it was before he was elected, that the first people came from Spoleto to look at Charleston. Of course, the mayor was instantly enthusiastic about it because he could see the great possibility for it in this community as a catalyst not only to raise the interest and involvement in people in the arts here, because we've had a long history of being leaders in the arts. The first opera was here, the first subscription concert series was here, the first theater in America was here. So there was a lot of tradition here.
Spoleto, USA could well be the most significant event that has occurred in Charleston since the Civil War. The city of Charleston and much of the South has been in mothballs since slightly before the Civil War. The Industrial Revolution passed us by.
The partnership with the city was absolutely critical to the festival. In the early days, the festival used city facilities to a fairly well. And the mayor basically set a tone for other people in the city that the festival was to be helped, that if we made reasonable requests, the requests were to be accommodated, and he couldn't have been more helpful. And I think another mayor would have looked at this in a much more short-term kind of fashion.
It was world-class, there was something for everyone. The venue had so much to do with it. I remember Clive Barnes was here one year, as a major critic, as you know, and he said, walking down the street after a performance, he said to me, how could you pan anything in an environment like this? I mean, it's so beautiful.
One of the hallmarks of his leadership over the past 40 years has been his fight for downtown Charleston. When he became mayor, downtown Charleston did not look like it looks today, and it was not nearly the healthy place that it is today. And he told me one time that he realized early on that Charleston wouldn't reach its full potential if downtown Charleston wasn't healthy. And he used the analogy of the human body, said if the heart's not healthy, the rest of the body can't be healthy. He realized when he became mayor that he didn't know enough about urban design, but yet that was going to be his most lasting legacy.
That Market Street was the only place in America that for 25 cents you could get a bowl of chili, a tattoo, and a communicable disease.
King Street, the sick spine of the city, it really was such a sad, sad looking piece of property with dirt ground and chain link fence and just quite blighted. So it's absolutely a miracle that what we have there today is something that is so successful.
The thing was that you wouldn't go to Market Street and during that same shopping experience go to King Street because there was this huge barrier. It was this vacant lot that went from Meeting Street to King Street on Market Street, and in urban places we don't walk past large vacant lots. That's just like, this isn't a good place, and why is that there?
The Charleston Place Hotel, which was the linchpin of his urban design plan at the corner of King and Market Streets, the idea being we build something and they will come, and they've come.
If it was done well, and if it had critical mass, lots of energy, and had storefronts and had a way to connect people as they do in cities, going from one interesting place to the next uninterruptedly, then that could provide the spark to ignite the revitalization of King Street.
You know, there's a lot of folks, just like what you see today, a lot of folks that weren't necessarily interested in having all these folks from off coming into town and worried about what might happen, you know, as a consequence of building this large hotel retail complex. And it became an emotional issue. He had the vision to see how, you know, a complex like the Charleston Place could ultimately ignite King Street and set the domino effect in place that's happened.
During Hurricane Hugo, which had, you know, was a huge hurricane that had come through the Caribbean and was a killer hurricane.
By 3 o'clock, many of the streets of Charleston were already empty, and there was that eerie feeling that we were taking pictures of the calm before the storm.
As Nightline goes to air tonight, Hurricane Hugo is battering the east coast of the United States. Thousands have fled to higher ground as winds are mixing with high tides to produce a potentially deadly combination.
First thing, the most important thing, was to communicate effectively to people that they had to get out of here.
There will be more flooding as a result of this storm than any Charlestonian has ever experienced. It will boggle the mind. So if you live in low-lying areas, take this remaining window of opportunity to evacuate.
The eye came over the city at midnight. It was a huge hurricane. It came right over the city, came right over this building, City Hall.
The roof of City Hall was one of many that became scrap metal.
Well, it's just a terrible thing. The storm was extremely severe, Category 4, biggest hurricane the city's had in a century, maybe in its history.
One of the things that was disturbing, when FEMA came in, it established a central place, you know, and where you go for help and so forth. And he realized, along with Senator Hollings, that just wasn't working. People didn't have a car, couldn't get down the roads.
Desperate people looking for government aid were met with frustration. Many thought the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is called into action in disasters, was a disaster unto itself.
The system has to be better. Our wonderful national government needs to have a system that can act with even greater urgency and speed.
All the bureaucracy, the mayor's supposed to petition the governor petitions the FEMA checks with the White House.
This is the crowd, you press the button, it moves in to help. They have moved in to block. They're the sorriest bunch of bureaucratic jackasses I've ever worked with in my life.
And the second most important thing after the storm was to give people hope.
Each person in this community who is alive can find somebody who is worse off than them. If we have a tree that is through our roof, we don't have to look far to see one who has no roof at all. And if we have no roof, we don't have to look far to find someone who has no house.
But the key was to constantly communicate with people truthfully, proactively, and it's a tricky balance because you want people you've got two constituencies. You've got the people who are here, to whom you want to give them confidence and be responsive to their needs. And then you've got the universe beyond here, to which you really have a dual message. Part of the message is, we need Pampers or whatever it is you need. And the other part of it is, we're fine, come on down.
What you don't want is for natural disaster to win. You don't want it to take something from the community, and conversely, it's very important for the community psychology to know, that we're staying on track. We're going to get things done.
What happened after Hurricane Hugo is that the standard for the city just rose. And you know, at first it was people fixing their houses because they'd gotten insurance money. But then more and more houses were fixed.
And then I think there's one other group of people I would mention, and those are the designers that he has brought in over the years, who are world-class urban design planners and architects and landscape architects, and bring them to Charleston and working with them on projects. And I think that did a number of things. It made those projects better, and you can look at the results of their work all over Charleston. But it also made Mayor Riley a better mayor and taught him so much about urban design.
The waterfront park was so significant in furthering Joe's goal of making the Charleston waterfront accessible to the people at every edge.
That land should be owned by the public, that was a duty, a responsibility to give that beautiful part of the city to all future generations.
Before it was built, Waterfront Park was just an edge of the city that was not a great looking or open to the public edge.
Builders of great cities, we all must be, and we must build with great care and beauty. For the lasting mark of a civilization is the city.
The mayor was so committed to that project and making it a people's park.
And when a city can combine a beautiful park with an exquisite water's edge, then the public realm is most greatly enhanced.
It's a very passive, beautiful park, and one of the real prizes, I think, of Mayor Riley's tenure in office.
You know, we acquired this land and we didn't really know what to do there. So then I determined that what we really needed there was residential. Best border of the park was residential. But in front of the fountain, it needed to be a public use. So I actually came up with the idea of an art gallery. It was perfect because it was about beauty.
On a daily basis, he made decisions that were aimed at making downtown Charleston as healthy as it could be as the center of that region.
One of the things I know that affected this community and this economy was the closing of the Navy base and how huge that was.
People want to trust leaders. They want leaders they can trust. It's always the number one thing. And the way you develop trust is you tell the truth. You're absolutely straight with people. And he rose to the occasion in Hugo. He rose to the occasion in base closure, a similar, really serious catastrophe here, where anybody could have taken the lead or nobody could have taken the lead.
And you have criteria number 6, cumulative economic impact. And if criteria 6 means anything at all, if it has any meaning at all, it means that every one of our facilities should be taken off the list.
We'd always depended on the military here for jobs.
$2 billion worth of supplies were going through the Navy Yard and through the Panama Canal.
Joe and other community leaders were absolutely determined to make sure that the economy didn't collapse.
And I think it's one of the smoothest transitions that I've observed in my lifetime.
And also what we'd done was we secretly, during the base closure process, I said we need to have a secret plan if we lose. It had to be secret because if the base closure knew we had that plan, they wouldn't feel sorry for us. I needed them to feel sorry for us and give us everything they could. So I raised money privately and quietly. We hired a firm because I wanted, if we lost, I wanted the next day in the newspaper for the citizens not to be depressed, oh my gosh, we've lost all this, what's going to happen? I wanted them to know we had Plan B.
I think it was at that time, too, that the emphasis on tourism really took off because you had to have something to balance.
The disasters catch you where you are,
and disasters accelerate trends already in place. So base closure was a disaster, Hugo was a disaster. In each instance where the city was we had been ascending with jobs in all sectors.
One of the problems has been what we call gentrification, and that is, in our case, the African American community has been pushed farther north and north on the peninsula.
The African American population of the peninsula, I think 20 years ago, was 28,000, and now it's around 10. That's a huge issue.
You've got a demographic moving into the peninsula that is not old Charleston, really. There's young Charleston with a mix of some descendants of old Charleston in it. And it's made the peninsula a very trendy place, restaurant-wise, business-wise, and it ripples across the community.
Gilliard built the auditorium. It's called the Gilliard Auditorium. It was just a municipal auditorium back in those days, but he built that on one of the best black community it was. Wall Street, the name of the street was Wall Street, and they had all of these places, and where the longshoremen, and they had nightclubs and grocery stores and, you know, drugstores and doctor's office. All of that stuff was there. And Gilliard made all of these black people move out of that neighborhood.
There are a few black folk who still live over there, and very literally not a week goes by when they don't get a call or a note or a visit from a developer who wants to see if they want to sell their house. And so there's aggressive change, and there's nothing to stem that wave of change. Some of it's not right, but it's not illegal.
Gentrification in a lot of those areas divided families. The wife didn't want to go west of the Ashley, the husband don't want to go. The kids really don't want to go anywhere because they're used to their friends and at the schools, so now they got to go to another school. There was a lot of families that I counseled with that really got divorced or got separated because of gentrification.
Those who are not a part of the economic tide that floats all boats have a little bit more difficult time, because those who once walked to work in hotels and restaurants in Peninsula Charleston, in many cases now have to take buses or find other means of transportation to do that.
When they were building low-income housing, they were building not quality housing, just slap some stuff together for low income. So we wanted affordable housing, good housing, made affordable for poor people, low-income folk. And Joe did that. This affordable housing and these segment of places that they did this really worked in terms of people being able to afford to be in some of these areas that they would not have been able to afford to be in.
And what I love about this park is that right up there is a senior citizens affordable housing development that will have porches and rocking chairs. So a very elderly person that can't get around too well can sit on their rocking chair and vicariously enjoy the park.
If we lose our diversity here, we lose Charleston. And once it's gone, you can never get it back. And that's part of the delicacy of the place.
When I was elected mayor a long time ago, our old ballpark was not in very good shape, and the owner was going to move it out of downtown. I said, you can't do that. To be competitive, we have to have a new ballpark. And so we built a new ballpark. It was a beautiful, expensive, appropriate ballpark, and it was controversial. People say, why need to build a ballpark? Why should the public be putting money in the ballpark? Well, the public puts money in a ballpark because it belongs to the public. It's a venue for the public to enjoy. Somebody said, you know, well, it's a complicated way of building on the water. It's a landfill. It costs more. Didn't you get an offer for free land out on the edge of town? I said, yeah, we did, but I wasn't interested in the free land. Free land is cheap land. Build something for the public. You give them the best land. Give them the finest land. Give them something that honors them. And the reason I knew I had to do all of that was 60 years ago, when I was 9 years old, my grandfather took me to College Park to my first professional baseball game. He held my hand. We walked up the creaky steps. I remember exactly where we sat. I picture him taking the pencil out of his pocket as he kept score. He taught me the game of baseball that he loved. Memories I'll never forget. The next year, he said there's an important game for us to attend. First African-American player in the Sally League was going to be there with the Jacksonville Braves. His name was Henry Aaron. Went to that game. And Henry Aaron hit a typical Aaron line drive into left field. And all of a sudden, there was a roar, a joyful explosion that still ringing in my ears. And it was the sadly segregated left field bleachers for African Americans and the joy that they felt in seeing that great man get a base hit, the first African American playing there. For a long time, I had believed that it was very unfortunate that the Confederate battle flag flew atop our state capitol.
The mayor came in one morning and told me and Mary Ann, as I recall, he said something like, maybe I've had too much coffee this morning, but I've got an idea. He said, I think I need to lead a march from Charleston to Columbia to let the rest of the world know that there is a political leader in South Carolina that feels strongly that the flag needs to come down.
Charleston Mayor Joe Riley launched a 120-mile trek to Columbia on foot.
South Carolina's Attorney General Charlie Condon. And the truth is this: the editorial writers and the politicians who have relentlessly criticized the Confederate flag should be ashamed of themselves. In my judgment, moving the flag would be a victory for the extremist groups.
We got a handwritten in pencil letter. If you bring a bunch of so-and-so into this county, I will have you in my gun sights.
That kind of situation just didn't deter Mayor Riley, and I think fueled him to know that he was doing the right thing and fighting for the right cause.
So I didn't say anything about it to my wife, and so I go home the night before the march, and when I got home, she said, Chief Greenberg came by with this paper bag, and he said, it's your bulletproof vest in there. And I said, oh, Lord. And walking long distances is different. You have to get your feet in shape for it. And so the first day I started getting a blister. And the second day, my feet were a mess.
One night we stayed in a motel that had, and we stayed under assumed names, we stayed in a motel that had, instead of rugs, it felt like they had Brillo pads on the wall-to-wall Brillo pad. And it hurt, our feet hurt so much. I remember crawling, and the mayor crawling to the, across the room to get to the other side.
But I'll never forget the sense when we marched up the Capitol steps with over 2,000 people with us, that group represented the best of what South Carolina had to offer.
Every civil rights organization, colleges, boards of trustees, and presidents, and athletic directors, and communities, and average citizen, rank and file, have said, remove the Confederate battle flag, and our legislature, with only 20-some days left in the legislative session, hasn't even begun to debate the bill on the floor of either chamber.
Well, that's what happens at those moments, right? If there's an intense debate going on and you jump up as a public official, as a leader, and make your opinion known and try to rally others.
The day we got to Columbia, the Senate voted to take up the resolution, which eventually resulted in the flag coming off the top of the state capitol.
By a vote of 63 to 56, the bill passes on second reading.
There were, I think, 2 people that walked every step. And one was an African-American lady who I didn't know. I remember her walking with me the first day here from Marion Square.
Let's come down! Let's come down!
So when we rounded Blossom Street onto South Main, and you can look up, see the Capitol. It's on a hill, and so you're kind of rising. And she was next to me, and she said, Mayor Riley, and she pointed to a convenience store. She said, that's where I work, and that's what I have to see every day. And I said, well, you won't any longer, because it's coming down.
The Senate agreed with the House version, which called for the Confederate banner to be flown at 30 feet high, a sign some point to as proof that the battle over the Confederate flag is not over.
Mayor Riley has done an admirable job of staying out of the bigoted political cesspool that is politics in Charleston, in South Carolina, and in the United States, because the sad part about America is, rather than South Carolina becoming more like America, America's become more like South Carolina. That's a horrifyingly ugly thought.
Timberland boots, and he's clean shaven.
White male, about 21.
White male, approximately 21 years of age. Gray sweatshirt.
Gray sweatshirt.
Gray sweatshirt, possibly hoodie, blue jeans, Timberland boots, and he's clean shaven.
You have this horrible person, warped by hate, decides to come to Charleston and picks the most historic, oldest AME church in the South, walks in there and kills 9 people. It was horrible. It was one of the darkest days in the city's history, if not the darkest day. I mean, he was Joe Riley's worst nightmare come to life.
People in prayer on a Wednesday evening, a ritual, coming together, praying and worshiping God, to have a awful person come in and shoot them.
At 9:05 this evening, we received a call of a shooting that had occurred at the church here on Calhoun Street. When officers arrived, they found a number of victims inside.
We just left speaking with members of the family. It was a heartbreaking scene I have never witnessed in my life before. And I told them that this community sends forth their love to them, and that we are all in this together.
He is a big-hearted person, and so he was on the scene not only showing that the city was in control of the situation from a policing standpoint, but also showering all these people who are suffering with his love, which he has an amazing capacity to do.
This morning, I spoke with, and Vice President Biden spoke with Mayor Joe Riley and other leaders at Charleston to express our deep sorrow over the senseless murders that took place last night.
What happened here was a horror. You had the massacre, the murder, possibly, we don't know, the assassination maybe, of the Reverend Clemente Pinckney and 8 other members of Emmanuel Church who were here for Bible study, who probably didn't see it coming, because it's not unusual for urban churches to welcome visitors they don't know.
Another mass shooting, another lone wolf gunman, another Aurora, another Newtown. Or was this something different?
The need to say that this young man was a lone wolf, although I'm fond of saying, as I said at ETV, when you get a bunch of wolves together, it's a pack, and there's a behavioral pattern that can't be ignored. But there was a need to push him to the edges, to make sure that the good majority of society showed up and showed we are better than this. And it's an interesting American phenomenon. When America looks at black folks, then they're looked at en masse. So anybody black who does anything is representative of the race, particularly if that's a negative thing. If somebody white does something negative, then that person is an outlier, because there's no group identification like that.
You've been mayor here since 1975. What are you feeling? What are you going through right now?
It's nothing has happened in this community in my life like this. And the closest thing, I think, was a feeling people had when President Kennedy was assassinated.
If that young man thought he was going to divide this community or divide this country with its racial hatred, we are here today and all across America resoundingly say he miserably failed.
I had, in the days and weeks after the shooting, a lot of people, a lot of local people, city councilmen, public officials from other towns, state legislators, who all talked to me and said, Charleston's reaction to this has been amazing, this outpouring of love and unity. And you know what? Every one of them credited that to Joe Riley.
And in that brief time, that responding to this violence that you couldn't plan for, it showed the world something that the world was looking for. And that when difficult things happen, how a community can respond in a positive, loving, nonviolent, caring, giving way.
What do you make of this debate now? Does this tear South Carolina apart or bring it together?
It brings South Carolina together, and it will happen. The flag is going to be moved. It's unfortunate that such a horrific, tragic event is the reason, but it's going to go.
Yeah, it was funny when Governor Haley decided to take down the flag. She did a lot of talking to the people who've been trying to do it for years. She called the mayor a few times, asked him to meet with her and Clyburn. Everybody thought there would be some kind of compromise, that somebody would try to do something else, that they didn't see anybody being able to pull off the politics of just completely taking the flag off the property.
I'm sorry, I have heard enough about heritage. I have a heritage. I am a lifelong South Carolinian. I am a descendant of Jefferson Davis, okay? But that does not matter. It's not about Jenny Horn. It's about the people of South Carolina who have demanded that this symbol of hate come off of the State House grounds.
He gave people hope, not just to have hope, but also with the reality that we're going to get through this.
State government is removed. Governors are too far removed. Even county leaders, that's usually bigger jurisdictions. But a mayor, and especially in a city like Charleston, they get that feedback directly. They respond to it. Their opinions get shaped by it. And the mayor has been out and about doing that for over 4 decades as a public official. And that's just an extraordinary amount of background and knowledge and nuance that he has as a leader.
He's a Renaissance man. That's his legacy. You don't find many politicians who are. And so he is skilled politically, but his visions and his goals are so broad. It encompasses humanitarian efforts.
And I told my wife I was just serving 1 term. But I really thought that my duty in life then was to run for mayor, unite the community, pass it on to somebody, and go back to practice law. The job of mayor, I would argue, I've been doing it, so I'm biased, but is the best job in public service.
In leading a city, you have this wonderful continued inspiration driven by your knowledge of the goodness of the citizens. I thank you and those before you for being the wonderful, good-hearted, kind, generous-spirited people that you are. And I want you to know It has been an honor to serve you as your mayor. Thank you very much. It's going to be the most exciting downtown in any city in this part of the country.